Daniel Mercer had seen storms before, sandstorms that turned daylight into rust, thunderstorms that shook forward operating bases like toys, blizzards that swallowed entire mountains. But this one felt personal. Ice-laden wind howled around the old lodge like a living thing, ramming itself against the log walls, rattling every window, making the rafters groan. Snow came in sideways, a white blur swirling beneath a steel-colored Montana sky. Inside, in the stale chill of the great room, his service dog Koda suddenly stopped being calm. The big sable German shepherd had spent the last hour curled near the cold fireplace, content to doze while Daniel unpacked a few essentials. Now, without warning, he shot to his feet. Every muscle drew tight, his ears flattened, his tail lowered, and a low, trembling whine leaked out of his chest. Not at the door, not at the windows, at the floor, at the stone hearth itself. "Koda?" Daniel's voice was rough from disuse and coffee. The dog ignored him, pacing in a tight, agitated line in front of the fireplace. He lowered his head, sniffed hard at the mortar lines between the flat hearthstones, then raked his claws against them in frantic, scraping bursts. It wasn't random anxiety. It was targeted, focused. Daniel felt the old instinct kick in, the one from another life, when Koda had worn a tactical harness and he had worn a uniform, and nothing about strange behavior could be dismissed. This was how Koda had reacted to buried IED casings in Afghanistan. This was how he'd reacted to hidden bodies in collapsed houses after the earthquake in Haiti. He was not afraid of the storm. He was afraid of what lay under their feet. Something was wrong with this lodge, wrong in a way that had teeth, and Daniel, who had come here for quiet, knew that quiet was already gone. 6 hours earlier, there had been no wind, no ice, just fluorescent lights and stale coffee. The Gallatin County Courthouse Annex smelled like paper dust and wet wool. Daniel sat on a creaking wooden bench at the back of the auction room, shoulders square, boots planted, his posture unconsciously straight in that way 20 years in the Army carved into your bones. His eyes, though, weren't on the auctioneer. They were on the glass where a gray sky smeared itself over Bozeman's old brick buildings. At his feet, Koda lay with practiced ease, paws crossed, head resting on one foreleg. His coat was a striking mix of black saddle and tawny gold, his face dark masked, eyes the color of old amber, watchful, thoughtful, always measuring. The little service dog do not pet patch on his harness had faded from years of sun and work. Lot 23, the auctioneer droned, 2 late model snowplows, bidding starts at 6,000. Hands went up, voices murmured. The room had energy for plows and trucks and seized equipment. Daniel tuned it out. He already knew what he was here for. He'd found it by accident, scribbled in neat ink at the bottom of a printed list of delinquent properties. Parcel 14F, former Northridge Lodge and Camp, 120 acres. Structurally compromised, uninhabited. No photo, no glossy packet, just a line, and a schedule for public auction. The auctioneer's voice rolled on. Next up, Lot 31, Parcel 14F, commonly referred to as Northridge Lodge, located off County Road 19. The room changed. It was subtle, but Daniel felt it like a temperature drop. Conversation thinned. The shuffle of papers stopped. A chair creaked, and then didn't. People were looking at him. He saw it in the reflection on the glass before he turned. The way a dozen locals, ranchers in canvas jackets and town officials in button-downs shifted in their seats. Some eyes narrowed, others slid away. The auctioneer coughed. His monotone faltered. Description. 1 main lodge, several outbuildings. Property seized by county after 12 years of unpaid taxes and unresolved code violations. Sold as is, no guarantees. He didn't mention why the taxes had stopped, or why nobody had touched it in over a decade. Everyone else already knew. We'll open the bidding at $500. The number hung there, absurd and heavy at the same time. A $500 lodge, a $500 problem. Daniel raised his hand. 500. The auctioneer's gaze locked to him with open relief. I have 500 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 6? He did not. Not the man in the oil-stained ball cap near the front, who suddenly found his boots fascinating. Not the realtor, who snapped her folder closed and stared at the floor. not the county road supervisor who sucked his teeth and gave Daniel a small, helpless shake of the head. The silence wasn't the silence of indifference. It was the silence of people watching someone walk into a room they refused to enter. Going once, the auctioneer said quickly. Going twice. Koda lifted his head, eyes tracking the invisible tension in the room. Sold, to the gentleman in the back, $500. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. On paper, Daniel had just bought 120 acres of mountain land and a useless old lodge. In the eyes of everyone around him, he'd just volunteered to step into a story they'd all agreed to leave buried. The clerk pushing the receipt across the counter couldn't have been more than 22. Her badge read, Carly. She didn't meet his eyes. You'll want chains on your tires, she muttered. That road up there's tricky, especially this time of year. I've driven worse, Daniel said. Anything else I should know? Her fingers tightened on the edge of the deed. Lots of people say things. She swallowed. They say that place is bad luck. Bad luck doesn't stop paying property tax, he said quietly. People do. Something flickered in her face. Fear, maybe, or guilt. Look, she said, lowering her voice. If anyone asks, I didn't say anything, okay? But if you're smart, you'll go talk to Hank over at Outpost Supply before you head up. He's the only one who'll tell you straight about that place. She pushed a folded map toward him with the deed, as if adding extra paper could somehow distance her from whatever she'd just done. Koda leaned against Daniel's leg, reading his tension, anchoring him with 90 pounds of solid muscle and steady breath. Thank you, Carly, Daniel said. She flinched at the sound of her name. When he stepped back out into the cold Bozeman air, the sky had darkened further, snow threatening, wind smelling of ice and distant pine. The kind of day when normal people stayed inside. Daniel loaded the deed and map into the glove compartment of his old Ford and drove 3 blocks down to Outpost Supply and Tack. The bell over the door jingled when he pushed it open. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the sense of oiled leather, wood smoke from an old stove in the corner, and the rough comfort of coffee that had been left on the burner too long. A man in his 60s stood behind the counter, spare-built, sun-creased face, gray mustache, blue eyes that had seen more than he intended to say. Afternoon, he called. What can I... His gaze dropped to Koda's harness, then to the folded deed in Daniel's hand. Recognition landed hard. The warmth in his voice cooled. You the one who just bought North Ridge? Yeah, Daniel said. Name's Daniel Mercer. The older man nodded slowly. Hank Morrison. This is my place. Koda did a polite sit, ears perked. Hank eyed the dog. Military? Was, Daniel said. Koda worked search and rescue with me. Well, hell. Hank's mouth twitched. You brought the smartest head in the county with you at least. He poured a second cup of coffee without asking and slid it across. Can't say I envy you, son, he added quietly. That lodge should have been bulldozed a long time ago. Daniel curled his hands around the hot mug. I keep hearing that. Nobody says why. Hank leaned his elbows on the counter, eyes shifting toward the front window, as if the wind itself might be listening. You ever heard of the Elias Foundation? He asked. Daniel shook his head. Back before you came here, there was this big, shiny nonprofit that rolled into Gallatin County, talked about healing retreats and innovative trauma therapy. Bought North Ridge Lodge from an old hunting outfitter and turned it into a year-round camp. Hank's mouth thinned. They took in foster kids, he said. Kids from tough homes, vets, first responders, folks nobody else wanted to deal with. People gave them land, money, volunteers. They said they were doing God's work. He stared down at his calloused hands. The man running it, Dr. Patrick Elias, came from back east, always in the news, always at the Chamber of Commerce luncheons, talked pretty, smiled pretty. But the sheriff's deputies who got called up there at night, the EMTs, they saw things that didn't match the brochures. Like what? Kids with night terrors that never stopped, Hank said. Staff that rotated out so fast nobody knew anybody's last name. The county inspector found unpermitted buildings hidden in the trees, underground storage rooms with the kind of ventilation you don't build for food. Daniel's coffee turned to acid in his gut. And then one winter, Hank said, the van stopped coming. Phone number disconnected, letters returned. Snowplows went by and saw no tire tracks. A social worker came checking on a kid who'd been placed there. No one home. Lodge locked. No sign of anybody. They got a warrant. Found the place abandoned. He looked up, meeting Daniel's gaze. Except for the basement. A chill snaked down Daniel's spine that had nothing to do with the weather. There were doors nobody seemed to have keys for, Hank said, and before anybody could get serious about forcing them, the county commissioner ordered the place condemned. They put warning signs up. Find the Elias Foundation for code violations that never got paid. Folks assumed Elias had run off, taken his money and his secrets with him. He took a breath. 2 months later, the Elias Foundation closed up shop in 3 other states. Nobody could find a board, a director, nothing. It all just dissolved, like smoke. And the lodge, Hank shrugged. Sat there, taxes piled up. The county tried to auction it quiet a couple times, but every time, the notices never quite went out to the public. Got lost. He gave Daniel a long, level look. Until this year. Wind rattled the front windows, pushing fine snow along the glass. Why tell me this? Daniel asked. Because you walked into my store with that paper in your hand and a dog that looks like he knows how to find buried things, Hank said. And you've got the eyes of somebody who's already seen too much to turn around just 'cause an old man tells you a ghost story. He slid a pack of batteries and a heavy flashlight onto the counter, added a pry bar, a box of long screws, 2 extra padlocks. On the house? Daniel asked dryly. Hank snorted. Not that honest, but half off. He hesitated, then reached under the counter and pulled out a dog tag on a thin chain. The stamping had worn soft, but Daniel could still make it out. Morrison, Jacob, O. Pose, USF. My boy, Hank said. He didn't come back right. Elias Foundation flew him out to their camp for a breakthrough program. Said he'd come home a new man. He swallowed. They closed up 3 weeks after he left, Hank said. I never saw him again. The room seemed to narrow. Koda shifted closer, leaning hard into Daniel's leg as though he felt the weight of Hank's grief. I'm sorry, Daniel said quietly. Hank nodded once, brusque. You're not the one who should be. He tapped the dog tag. You find anything up there that has my boy's name on it, he said, or any of those kids' names. You don't bring it to the sheriff. You put it in hands that can't be bought. Got anyone in mind? There's a reporter out of Portland keeps calling here every few months, Hank said. Woman named Tessa Rios. Says she's doing a podcast on vanished nonprofits and troubled teen programs. Sent me a card. He fished in his pocket, produced a bent business card, and slid it across. Daniel tucked it into his wallet. He didn't know yet that the card would become the most important thing he carried out of that store. The drive to North Ridge took the rest of the afternoon. As Bozeman fell away in the rearview mirror, the world stretched out into long cuts of pasture and timber and frozen streams, the mountains rising higher and closer until they ate the horizon. Koda watched it all with unblinking attention, nose twitching at every vent of new scent that slipped in through the cracked window. The county road changed from asphalt to packed dirt, then to ruts mapped with ice, cutting through dense spruce and lodgepole pine. The entrance to the property was marked by 2 leaning posts and a rusted sign that had once read, North Ridge Lodge, Healing in the High Country. Most of the letters had flaked away. The steel gate hung open, bent and useless. That's not ominous at all, Daniel muttered. The truck lurched over hidden rocks and frozen bumps. Twice he had to stop and chainsaw down deadfall that had conveniently dropped into the path and stayed there long past the point any wind would have moved them. By the time the trees thinned and the lodge came into view, the sky had that thick, low look that said the weather was about to turn mean. The lodge sat on a rise above a half-frozen creek, its dark log walls and pitched roof hunkered against the slope. Wide decks wrapped around the front, sagging in places. A torn banner flapped weakly from one rail. Faded painted words. Welcome campers. The windows were a dull, lightless black. Daniel killed the engine. Silence dropped in like a weight. No traffic, no planes, no voices. Just the faint rush of tree-filtered wind and the distant moan of the storm gathering its strength. Well, buddy, he said softly, glancing at Koda. Retirement paradise, right? Koda thumped his tail once, politely, but his eyes stayed fixed on the building. They stepped out into air that was already biting at exposed skin. Snow grains blew like sand across the gravel. Somewhere in the timberline, a raven croaked once, then fell silent. When Daniel pushed on the front door, it opened. With almost no resistance, the warped wood sighing on its hinges. The smell hit him first. Old wood and colder air, stale and sharp. The sour hint of long-dried bleach. Dust thick enough to taste, layered over something else. A faint, metallic tang that lived deep in the boards. The great room stretched wide and long. Rows of bunk beds along one wall, their mattresses stripped. A cluster of chairs around a cold stone fireplace. Posters still tacked on the log walls. Safety rules. Cartoon animals telling kids to share your feelings. Someone had left in a hurry, but not so suddenly they couldn't clean up. There were no papers scattered, no drawers half open. Everything was staged, cleared to the surface. Daniel moved slowly, boots whispering on the dusty floor, Koda pacing ahead with his nose low. The dog checked doorways, sniffed corners, paused at the base of the stairs that led up to second-floor rooms and offices. Nothing yet. No fresh scents, no squatters. "Clear?" Daniel asked. Koda's tail gave a cautious wag. They spent an hour doing a full circuit. Kitchen, commercial-sized but empty of food. Infirmary with an examination table, cabinets bare of meds but still labeled sedation, anxiolytics, stimulants. That last one made Daniel's jaw tighten. In the admin office, a dent in the carpet showed where a safe had once sat. Holes in the wall marked where photos had been unscrewed with neat precision. Whoever left had taken anything obvious with them. By the time Daniel lugged in his duffel and a crate of canned goods, the first flakes were swirling heavier behind the glass. He got the generator in the shed, humming just enough to light a few bulbs and power an electric kettle. Heat would have to come from the fireplace. He stacked a cautious load of old dry wood, checked the chimney with his flashlight, and decided it wasn't likely to fill the room with smoke. It was when he bent to strike the match that Koda changed. 1 second the dog was lying near the hearth, content. The next, his head snapped up like someone had called his name in a language only he knew. A tremor ran through his shoulders. His tongue slid back into his mouth. The easy softness vanished from his eyes. He walked forward in 3 stiff, deliberate steps and planted himself on the hearthstones. His nose dipped, his sides shook with the force of his inhale. Then the whining began. Not loud, not panicked, but constant. "Koda, hey," Daniel said. "It's just a fire. We've used 100 of these." The dog ignored him, scraped a paw across a particular line in the stone. Scraped again, harder, nails screeching. Daniel's first impulse was to tell him to knock it off before he cracked a claw. Years of training almost put the command on his tongue. Years of experience swallowed it. He set the unlit match aside. "All right," he said, voice low. "Show me." He ran his fingers along the line Koda had worried. It felt like just another gap between flagstones, dust, bits of old ash. But the mortar was smoother there, darker, almost rubbery where the rest was sandy and crumbling. His fingertips found a faint straight edge where no straight edge should be. A panel, not a stone. The room seemed suddenly smaller. The storm's first real gust slammed against the windows, rattling the glass. Daniel went back out into the cold for his pry bar. When he returned, Koda had backed off a careful distance, but his entire body leaned forward, eyes glued to that same seam. His breath cut fast and shallow, the way it had when they worked collapsed buildings together, when he smelled something terrible but important. Daniel wedged the bar beneath the edge and leaned his weight into it. For a moment, nothing. His shoulder twinged, an old bullet grazed complaining. Then, with a sickening crack and a hiss of breaking sealant, the front edge of the stone lifted half an inch. He shifted his grip, hauled with everything he had. The slab came up with a shudder and slid to the side, thudding onto the boards. Cold, dead air poured out of the hole beneath it. Koda whined once, sharp and high, then went utterly still. The cavity below was deeper than a hiding spot. 4 feet down, maybe more, lined with concrete. A narrow metal ladder bolted into the side. No damp, no dirt. Someone had built this intentionally, with care. Light from the room fell only so far before the shadows swallowed it. "Stay," Daniel told Koda. not as a command he expected him to obey, but as a promise. He clipped a small flashlight between his teeth and lowered himself into the dark. His boots found solid floor. He swung the light. The space was maybe 8 feet long, 4 wide. A secret vault dug beneath the living heart of the lodge. 4 gray plastic storage totes lined one wall, lids sealed with tape that had yellowed but not cracked. On the other side sat a metal file cabinet, its drawers labeled in neat black marker, Intake, Trial A, Trial B, Incidents. On a metal shelf above them, there was a row of hard drives, their casings dusty, cables bundled neatly beside them with twist ties. And hanging alone, at eye level, on a nail in the concrete, a lanyard with a badge. He lifted it. The photo showed a woman in her late 30s, dark hair pulled back, gray eyes that didn't quite match her forced smile. Dr. Leah Hart, clinical director. Across the bottom, the logo of the Elias Foundation. Underneath the logo, smaller, almost lost in the design, another name. In partnership with Alta Vista Therapeutics. Daniel's stomach went cold. He knew that name, Alta Vista, a biotech company that had been in the news a few years back for revolutionary neuromodulating compounds and quietly settled lawsuits involving test subjects with permanent personality changes. Jesus, he whispered. He looked up, following the tug in his memory all the way back to Hank's bent dog tag on the counter. Koda's nails clicked anxiously above him on the hearth. The dog whined again, more urgent this time. Yeah, Daniel called up softly. I see it, boy. He already knew, with a sinking certainty, that whatever was in these files was the reason the Elias Foundation had vanished, why North Ridge had rotted untouched for 12 long winters, why locals looked at him like a condemned man when he raised his hand at the auction. He also knew something else, as clearly as he knew how to clear a room blindfolded. Once somebody realized this vault had been found, they were going to come, and the storm outside, gathering its full fury, would be the perfect cover. The power went out just after dark. 1 second, the overhead bulbs flickered in their yellow humming way. The next, the room dropped into the orange half-light of the fireplace and the swipe of wind-driven snow against the glass. The generator coughed once in the shed and died. Guess we're doing this old school, Daniel muttered. Koda paced a tight track between the hearth and the front door, his instincts roaring loud as the wind. Every time the lodge's timbers groaned, he froze, listening with his whole body. Daniel had cracked open one storage tote and found rows of labeled vials in foam slots, all fastidiously cataloged. Inside the file cabinet, the first drawer had yielded intake forms, dozens of them. Kids, vets, cops, firefighters, dates, diagnoses, signatures. Words like Phase 2 Protocol, Compound AVT 53, Emotional Suppression Metrics. In the second drawer, incident reports, black ink on white paper, the script small and tight and controlled. Client 17 experienced severe dissociative episode after night 4. Client reports hearing voices instructing harm to self and others. Sedation protocol initiated. Client 4 demonstrates near total compliance following dosage increase. Notable decrease in startle response and moral hesitation. Someone had been trying to edit people, to chemically wreck and rebuild their empathy. And they'd use this lodge to do it. He needed help, not from the sheriff, not from anyone who answered to county boards or donors who might have taken Alta Vista's money. He needed someone whose job it was to burn stories like this open. Daniel took Hank's card from his wallet and smoothed it on the dusty table. Tessa Rios, investigative journalist, host, the Forgotten Files podcast. He stared at the number for a long second, then at the old corded landline on the wall. If he called now, and anyone still connected to the Elias Foundation had eyes in this county, they'd know exactly which line lit up and when. He needed distance, anonymity, a signal that didn't scream Northridge Lodge in the records. The storm hammered at the windows, tracing its own deadline. It might close the road by morning. It might also keep prying eyes away. His mind did the math the way it always had when planning a mission. He couldn't leave tonight. Visibility was already dropping to a blur, snow twisting into whiteout. Besides, he'd barely scratched the surface of what was in that vault. But in the morning, if the road was passable, he could make it into town, get to a library, a public machine. Until then, he needed to lock this place down. He resealed the vault as well as he could, dragging the faux stone back into place and dusting ash over the seams. The files he thought were most damning, the incident reports, a handful of vials, Leah Hart's badge, went into his rucksack, wrapped in a towel, hidden beneath spare shirts. If someone came in swinging, they might torch the lodge. They wouldn't think to check his bag if they thought he'd already died. A stupid thought, a fatalistic one. He pushed it aside. "Not dying on a $500 property, Koda," he said. "That's too pathetic even for us." Koda huffed once, like he agreed. They ate cold chili from a can and dry crackers by the fire, the flames pushing back against the creeping chill in the corners. For a little while, it was almost peaceful, just the crackle of sap in the logs, the storm's pitch rising and falling like distant surf. Koda's breathing slowed, his head drooped. Daniel let his own eyes close for a few minutes. It wasn't deep sleep. It never was. That old part of his brain, the part that had learned to wake at the wrong sound, snapped him upright a short time later. His watch said 11:42 p.m. The fire had burned down to red coals. The wind still howled, and beneath it, faint but unmistakable, a new noise, the growl of an engine. Koda was already on his feet, hackles up, a silent, vibrating line of alarm aimed toward the road. "Who the hell?" Headlights swept past the front windows, briefly painting the room in smeared white streaks before vanishing. A moment later, a heavy fist pounded on the locked front door. 3 quick thuds, pause, 2 more. The wind tried to steal the words, but they came through in pieces. "County Sheriff's Department. Check. Occupant." Koda's growl deepened from low thunder to something darker. "Easy," Daniel murmured. "We play this careful." He slung his rucksack on, zipped it, and set it near the back wall, slid his Old Bay 308 out from behind the couch, thumbed off the safety, then leaned it against the doorframe within reach. The knock came again, louder. "Sheriff's Department, open up!" No point pretending he wasn't home. The truck outside was a dead giveaway. Daniel cracked the door 2 inches, chain still latched. A blast of snow and ice-cold air shoved at the gap. On the porch, framed in the washed-out glow of a county SUV's headlights, stood a man in a tan winter uniform coat, badge glinting, hat pulled low, broad-shouldered mid-50s, cheeks red from the wind. His eyes, though, hard and flat as river stones. "Evening," the man boomed over the storm. "You Mercer?" "That's right," Daniel said. "You're Sheriff Ray Donnelly." The man flashed a shield. "Saw the record of sale come through and figured I'd come up. Make sure our new property owner wasn't buried in a snowbank. That road'll eat you alive in a storm if you're not used to it." He tried on a smile. It never reached his eyes. Those were flicking past Daniel's shoulder, cataloging the room, counting. "Appreciate the concern," Daniel said. "We're managing." "Mind if I step in a sec?" Donnelly asked. "I'll be out of your hair in a minute. Hard to hear you over this mess." It wasn't really a request. Daniel unlatched the chain and opened the door far enough for the sheriff to step through. Koda planted himself at Daniel's side, tail stiff, teeth just barely bared. "Whoa," Donnelly said, taking a wide step around the dog. "That your service animal?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "He doesn't like being surprised." "Can't blame him." Donnelly stomped snow off his boots, eyes doing a fast, trained sweep of the lodge. Fire, bunks, no other people. No obvious installation of a meth lab or anything else he could pretend was his concern. "How'd you find this place, Mercer?" he asked casually. "Most folks forget it exists." "Courthouse list," Daniel said. "Needed somewhere quiet. This was cheap." "Quiet," Donnelly repeated, like he was tasting the word for poison. "Sure, that it is." He moved toward the fireplace, holding his hands out to the heat. His gaze snagged on the hearth, lingered half a second too long. Daniel fought the urge to glance at the stone panel. "You know the county condemned half the structures up here," Donnelly continued. "Basements, sheds, bad foundations, dangerous." "I noticed the signs," Daniel said mildly. "I'll be careful." "You planning on staying?" "For now." Koda's growl rumbled again, so faint Daniel barely heard it. Donnelly's jaw ticked. "Well, you be sure to let us know if you find anything hazardous, old chemicals, unstable wiring, anything like that." He turned, snow melting in beads on his collar. Last thing we want is someone getting hurt on county land, he added. It's my land now, Daniel said, letting just enough steel into his voice. Of course. The sheriff's smile sharpened. Of course it is. He headed for the door, then paused, glancing back. Storm's supposed to worsen by morning, Donnelly said. Might be a good idea to get down off this ridge while you still can. Wouldn't want you stuck up here for days. No cell service, no plows. Nobody hearing you if you get in trouble. Koda's hackles bristled all the way down his spine. I'll keep that in mind, Daniel said. Donnelly left without another word, slamming the door against the wind. The SUV's engine revved and receded, red taillights bleeding away into white. Daniel watched until even the glow was gone. Then he grabbed his flashlight and coat. Come on, he told Koda. Let's see how worried he really was about our safety. The storm knifed into him as soon as he stepped outside, stealing breath, freezing eyelashes. Snow already drifted nearly to his shins. He fought his way to the truck, Koda bounding through the drifts beside him like a gray ghost. 3 tires looked fine, snow caked in their tread. The 4th, rear driver's side, had a thin, precise slice along the inner sidewall, just deep enough to bleed air slowly. Not a puncture from rock or scrap, a knife. He didn't want us safe, Daniel said quietly. He wanted us stuck. Koda pressed against his leg, warm even through layers of denim and thermal and parka. In that moment, under a sky boiling with snow and over a tire that was quietly dying, Daniel understood. Whatever happened at North Ridge wasn't some forgotten local rumor. Someone still cared about this place, cared enough to send the sheriff in person, cared enough to quietly sabotage the only vehicle on the ridge. He'd been right. The vault wasn't a relic. It was a live threat. And now he was sitting on it. By dawn, the storm had turned the world into a white cage. The hill below the lodge disappeared into a soft, deadly slope of snow that might be 3 feet deep, might be 10. Wind carved ghostly rivers of powder along the ridgeline, whistling through any gap it could find. The truck leaned slightly on its sagging tire, half buried. Until the wind eased and the drifting stopped, any attempt to drive out would be suicide. They were trapped. Good, Daniel thought grimly. Trapped went both ways. He spent the morning doing what he could, shoring up the front and back doors with extra boards and furniture, taping plastic over the windows to keep heat in and prying eyes out, stacking firewood inside so he wouldn't have to open the door more than necessary. Koda shadowed him, pausing every so often to stare at some point beyond the wall, ears pricked, nostrils flaring. Anything? Daniel asked. The dog's tail flicked. No immediate threat. Not yet. When the storm's roar settled into a steadier, less feral howl, Daniel set a lantern on the table beside the stack of files he'd taken from the vault. He read until the words blurred. Trial protocols, dosing schedules, tables of data correlating milligrams to measured changes, reaction time to moral dilemmas, compliance with orders to inflict fake pain on test subjects, willingness to self-sacrifice, pages of notes written in 2 distinct hands. One was clinical but careful, full of doubts. Leah H. patient expresses distress, recommending removal from protocol. Request denied. The other was efficient and cold. P.E. You are misinterpreting the data. Emotional discomfort is a desirable indicator of the rewiring Patrick Elias. Sprinkled throughout the files were incident reports that made Daniel's hands shake with anger. Staff member Anderson attempted to alert county's CPS. Terminated under Clause 14B. NDA reinforced. Client 23 removed from trial after violent break. Transfer to off-site facility arranged via Alta Vista liaison. The sense of people as units, as numbers in someone's experiment, dug under his skin and stayed there. By the time the storm outside shifted pitch again, less a steady roar, more a series of strange lulls and gusts, Daniel's jaw ached from clenching. Koda lifted his head. The dog's ears tipped forward, then to the side. He stood up in slow motion, every hair along his spine rising. The storm didn't sound right. Underneath the wind, a faint mechanical thrum. Brief, stopped. Daniel killed the lantern. The room plunged into dim firelight and shadow. "Talk to me, buddy," he whispered. Koda padded to the back wall, toward the mudroom, and the smaller, high-set window that looked onto the tree-choked slope. He stood perfectly still, nose lifted, breathing shallow. Then he gave a single, low bark. Back. Outside. Daniel slipped the rifle sling over his shoulder, moved to the window, and pushed the curtain aside just enough to make a tiny slit. At first, he saw nothing, just blown snow and the jagged ribs of dark trunks. Then a shape moved, not the lurch of a branch, not the bounce of an animal. A man, dark parka, goggles, moving with deliberate care along the lee side of the lodge where the snow was deepest, keeping low. A second shape behind him, a third further out. No lights, no shouted jokes, no clumsy cursing. Professional. They didn't come in like deputies doing a welfare check. They came in like a raid. Daniel breathed out slowly through his nose, mind clicking through options. He couldn't run. The storm would finish what they started. He couldn't call for help. The cell signal bar mocked him with emptiness. He had one tool the men outside didn't. Koda. "Okay, boy," he murmured. "We're not in the sandbox anymore, but the game's the same. You and me." Koda's tongue flicked over his nose. He vibrated with contained energy, but he didn't bark again. He knew the feel of a hunt. Daniel had fought in worse circumstances with less preparation, but the stakes hadn't always been this wide. If he died here, the vault might burn. The hard drives might melt in their casings. The story of what had been done to dozens, maybe hundreds of people, could die with him. If he survived and got the right pieces out, it wouldn't just be his problem anymore. He moved fast. In the dark of the great room, he dragged the heavy dining table away from the front windows, angling it into a rough barricade that gave him cover, but still left him sightlines through the glass. He shoved 2 bunk beds sideways, bolting them across the back mudroom door. The smaller rear window, the one closest to the creeping figures, he covered from the inside with a mattress and a wool blanket, stapled into place in a few swift practice tacks. If they wanted to come in, they'd have to make noise. That suited him fine. The first probe came 10 minutes later. A faint scratching at the back corner, metal on wood. Not enough to be a full attempt, just enough to test. Koda shifted toward it, growling low, then flicked his ears toward the front. "Split team," Daniel breathed. "Of course." When the front doorknob jiggled ever so gently, he was waiting, body tucked behind the table, rifle trained. A soft clink followed, the delicate whisper of thin metal sliding into an old lock. They'd picked Donnelly's lock last night. They'd pick his, too. He let them. The door eased inward an inch. 2. Snow blew in through the crack. A gloved hand slipped around the edge, then a shoulder. The man's silhouette appeared, a dark outline against white, head ducked low, handgun up. Koda's muscles bunched, but he held, every nerve thrumming. Daniel fired. The shot was deafening in the confined space. Splinters exploded from the doorframe 2 inches from the man's head. He flinched back instinctively, hand jerking, gun arm lifting. "Koda!" The shepherd shot forward, a blur of muscle and teeth and purpose. He didn't go for the throat. Daniel had never trained him for that. He went for the man's wrist. His jaws clamped down with brutal precision. Bone gave with a sick, crunching pop. The gun clattered into the snow outside. The intruder screamed, half falling off the porch, dragging Koda a foot with him before the dog's weight and leverage yanked him sideways. 2 more shapes materialized out of the storm, shouting. Daniel fired again, this time into the porch rail above their heads, kicking up a shower of shattered wood. "Next one's not a warning," he bellowed. "You want to walk away? You do it now." His voice carried through the shriek of the wind, hot and hard. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then someone out in the white snarled, "Fall back!" The 2 standing men grabbed the wounded one by his jacket, hauling him into the storm. Koda let go on command, backing to the threshold, teeth bared, fur puffed up twice his size. Daniel slammed the door, threw the bolt, shoved the table harder against it. His pulse hammered. The air in his lungs burned. He wasn't naive enough to think they were done. That had been the tap on the door. The next visit would bring a battering ram, metaphorically or literally. He checked his watch. 2:17 a.m. If they had any sense of the weather, they wouldn't want to be on the ridge after dawn. That gave him maybe 3 hours to hold. 3 hours between the vault underneath him and a world beyond the road that still believed the Elias Foundation was just a line on an old news article. He knelt and put his forehead briefly against Koda's, breathing in the dog's warm, wild scent, fur and old leather, and faint antiseptic from a life in hospitals. "We've done worse," he murmured. Koda licked his chin once, fiercely, then turned back to the wall, ears pricked. They came again just before 4, not at the doors this time. The first warning was smoke. It crept in around the edges of the front windows, at first a faint dark line against the already dim glass, then thicker, more insistent. Koda coughed once, sneezed, then backed away, whining. The scent, sharp, oily, hit Daniel's nose. Accelerant. They weren't going to take the lodge by force. They were going to erase it. In an old, dry building like this, a fire would climb into the rafters in minutes. Snow and ice on the roof would slow it only a little. By the time anyone saw the plume from the valley, the place would just be a hot ash pile, along with every vial, every file, every hard drive, every carved signature. He could take the bag on his back and run out into the white, try to slip away down the ravine, hope the storm covered his tracks, hope they didn't have thermal. He looked at Koda. The dog stood at the top of the hearth, looking from the fire that hadn't yet started to the wall that hid their one real secret. "We're not leaving it," Daniel said. He moved fast, grabbed 2 wool blankets off the bunks, dunked them in the water barrels, and slapped them over the front windows from the inside, trying to buy a few extra minutes before the heat blew the glass. The smoke thickened, flames flickered in the corners of the panes, an eerie, crawling orange. Heat seeped in like a new kind of wind. He had one insane advantage. The vault wasn't in the basement. It was under the hearth. If he could get back down there, seal himself in for the worst of the blaze, there was a chance the concrete and stone would shield them from the worst of the fire's hunger. Or he'd bake alive. He weighed those 2 things against dragging Koda into a whiteout that had already tried to kill them twice. The vault it was. He ripped the fake stone free, muscles flooding with adrenaline, and tossed it aside. "Koda, down!" The dog hesitated only a heartbeat, then scrambled onto the ladder, trusting him the way he always had, descending into the small, cold space. Daniel followed, dragging the stone back over the hole as much as he could from below. It didn't seal completely. A strip of light showed along one edge. Smoke came with it. He yanked the wet blankets down over the crack, cramming them into place, and sat with his back against the concrete wall, Koda pressed into his side in the narrow space. Above them, the sound changed. The crackle of flames became a roar, devouring old timber, leaping through decades of dust. As the fire found old varnish, old glue, old carpet backing, the air picked up an acrid tang. Koda panted, tongue lolling, eyes wide. His chest heaved against Daniel's arm. "It's okay," Daniel whispered, though nothing about this was okay. "This is just one more shitty room we're hiding in together, all right? You've done worse." His own lungs burned. Every breath felt like he was pulling air through a dirty rag. Time blurred. 5 minutes. 10. A beam somewhere above groaned, gave a long, agonized shriek, and collapsed. The impact shook soot down into the vault. Embers skittered across the top of the stone like angry fireflies. Heat radiated down. The wet blankets sizzled, steam billowing off them. Daniel leaned his forehead against Koda's neck and thought, not for the first time. This might have finally been the dumb call. Then, cutting through the roar and crack and his own ragged heartbeat, a new sound, low at first, then building. A rhythmic thump that vibrated faintly in the concrete. Not the roll of thunder, not the crash of collapsing beams. Rotors, helicopters, 2 sets. The storm had thinned, or someone with a bigger budget than the Gallatin County Sheriff had decided it didn't matter. Koda's ears twitched, trying to parse the unfamiliar vibration. Daniel coughed around a laugh that came out more like a choke. "Tessa," he rasped, "you crazy woman." He'd sent nothing to her yet. No files, no email. But Hank had given him the card, told him she called every few months. If Sheriff Donnelly knew the land had been sold today, chances were someone else did too. someone in an office somewhere with a donor list. It wouldn't take much for a good reporter to put together the sale record, the property, and the pattern she'd been tracking for 2 years. And if she'd gone bigger, to federal contacts, to attorneys, to anyone who'd ever worked a case involving Alta Vista, the cavalry might just have arrived before the smoke finished them, if they survived long enough to be dug out. His world narrowed to breathing and heat and Koda's weight. Eventually, somehow, the roar above shifted again, from wild eating flame to a new directed hiss, the blast of hoses. Voices shouted, muffled, distant. Boots pounded on half-collapsed floors. Then, at last, the stone above them scraped sideways. Cold, clean air knifed in, and a beam of bright daylight stabbed his eyes. "Got two!" a voice shouted. "One human, one K9. Strong hands grabbed his arms, hauling him up into the charred skeleton that had been the great room. Smoke and steam twisted along the blackened rafters. The front wall was gone. Snow blew in across a floor of ash and ember. Through the haze, Daniel saw 2 helicopters on the ridge, one with Montana Highway Patrol along the side, the other, unmarked, matte dark, the kind of machine that didn't need to brand itself. Men and women in heavy tactical gear moved with practiced efficiency. Some on the perimeter, weapons ready, others working alongside local volunteer firefighters to knock down the last stubborn tongues of flame. Near what had once been the porch, 3 men knelt in the snow, hands zip-tied behind their backs, faces bruised, one arm bandaged hastily. A 4th figure stood off to the side, face pale, suit jacket incongruous over a thermal shirt, watching the ruin of the lodge with an expression that hovered between rage and utter defeat. Daniel didn't know his name yet. He didn't need to. He knew the type. Someone whose donations showed up on Elias Foundation brochures. Someone whose name appeared on Alta Vista's board. Someone who had believed this ridge was his, this story was his to bury. "Mr. Mercer?" Daniel turned. A woman in a blue parka with an FBI crest stood a few feet away, helmet tucked under one arm, smoke streaking her face. Her eyes were sharp, tired, and, most importantly, angry in the right direction. "I'm Special Agent Nadia Breen," she said. "We've been trying to get up here since 3 this morning. Weather finally gave us a window. We got a call from a journalist in Oregon who's apparently been a very persistent thorn in a lot of people's sides." "Tessa Rios," Daniel rasped. Agent Breen nodded once. "She sent us everything she's been compiling on the Elias Foundation and Alta Vista. That, combined with a flagged sale of this property, was enough for a judge to give us emergency authorization to move, given the risk of evidence destruction." She glanced at the burned skeleton of the lodge. "Looks like we were about 5 minutes late." Daniel shook his head, coughing. "Not entirely. The worst of it is still intact." He pointed, past the ruined roof, past the scorched bunks, to the stone base of the fireplace. "The vault's under there," he said. "Files, hard drives, vials, enough to make whoever that is." He nodded toward the suited man in the snow. "Lose a lot more than a vacation home." Koda leaned against his leg, ash dusting his fur, tongue lolling, eyes bright with exhausted triumph. Breen followed his gaze. Her mouth tightened when she saw the badge clipped to the suited man's belt. "Congratulations, Mr. Mercer," she said quietly. "You've just ruined Senator Clay Harlow's re-election campaign." "Glad I could help," Daniel said. His knees felt like water. His lungs felt lined with sandpaper. But under the pain, under the smoke, under the fact that he was standing in the wreckage of what was supposed to have been a quiet, anonymous life, there was something else. Relief. And a strange, fragile sense of rightness. He looked down at Koda. "You did good," he said. The shepherd bumped his head into Daniel's hip hard enough to nearly knock him sideways. Weeks later, when the snow finally started to pull back from the hillsides and the valley's creeks ran dark and fast with meltwater, the yellow tape around North Ridge came down. The lodge was gone. All that remained was the concrete footprint, some blackened beams piled neatly to one side, and the stone base of the old fireplace, now carefully dismantled and labeled by evidence techs. Daniel stood on what used to be the front step and watched a pickup come up the newly plowed road. Tessa Rios climbed out, pushing her hair back under a beanie, a recorder tucked into her jacket pocket, despite the fact that the major interviews had already been conducted weeks before. Her podcast had dropped its 4-part series on the Elias Foundation to national shock. The Vault's files had backed up what she'd been tracing for years, a network of therapeutic programs that had in fact been human labs, all quietly funneled into Alta Vista's development streams. Senator Harlow's campaign donations made their own ugly spiderweb through it all. 3 more facilities in other states were under federal investigation. Former staff had begun flipping in exchange for protection. Families who'd never known where their loved ones had gone finally had names, dates, trails. Nobody was calling Daniel Mercer a hero. Koda, however, had 3 separate fan art accounts in his honor. "Thought you might still be up here," Tessa said, crunching over the half-melted snow. "Agent Breen said you refused relocation." "Didn't see the point," Daniel said. "They know my face already, and this place—" He shrugged. "Feels like I still owe it something." Koda trotted out from behind the skeletal remains of a gear shed, carrying a stick far too big for his mouth, tail wagging. He dropped it at Tessa's boots with a hopeful huff. She laughed, bending to scratch his ears. "I've never met a dog who took to the microphone like this one. Every time I played back an interview, he'd tilt his head like he was fact-checking me." "He was probably just checking your levels," Daniel said. "So," Tessa went on, straightening, "what are you going to do with the land?" He looked out at the ridge. The scars of the fire were still stark, black streaks, ash-coated patches, but already green was pushing up at the edges. "I've got a line on a non-profit out of Denver," he said slowly. "They run real trauma recovery programs, transparent, overboarded, all the right auditors, dogs involved from day one." He felt Koda bump his leg again, as if to underline the point. "I'm thinking," he added, "if someone like me had had a place like that 10 years ago, maybe it wouldn't have taken a blown-up lodge and a felon senator to give me a reason to get up in the morning." Tessa smiled in a way that had nothing to do with downloads or headlines. "That's a hell of a post-credit scene," she said. "Mind if I steal the phrase when I record the epilogue?" "Do whatever you want," Daniel said, "as long as Koda gets full producer credit." The dog barked once, sharply, as if sealing the deal. They stood there for a while in companionable silence, listening to the creak and the distant caw of a raven. The wind moved through the pines in a softer voice now. Not a howl, a whisper. "The weird thing," Tessa said eventually, "is that if your dog hadn't scratched at that hearth, none of this would have come out. I'd still be chasing ghosts across 3 states. Daniel shook his head. "Koda didn't find the truth," he said. "He just refused to let it stay buried." He reached down, fingers sinking into thick fur. "And I finally listened. He used to think that home was a place you escaped to. A cabin, a ridge, a piece of land cheap enough that nobody cared if you disappeared on it. Now, standing on the burned clean foundation of a lodge that had once been a factory for someone's cruelty, he understood something else. Home wasn't the building. It was the choice to stay when it would be easier to run. It was the dog who sank his claws into the floor when you tried to walk away from a fight that still needed you. Sometimes, the place you belong most is the place where you're needed least in theory and most in truth." Koda nudged his hand again, then trotted to the edge of the clearing, nose lifting, reading the wind like a book. He looked back once. "Come on, work to do." Daniel followed,